also want to welcome our forum partner, the YWCA, represented by Elfie DeBella, former president of this board, and we want to thank them all for their support. Please join me in thanking them. I'll refer you once again to the forum flyer because the full biographies are in there, so I'll just make brief introductions. Our first panelist has been a judge with the Franklin County Municipal Court since 2003. Please welcome Judge Paul Herbert. Our next is the Director of Professional and Community Services for the Salvation Army. She is responsible for their anti-human trafficking initiative, including Central Ohio Rescue and Restore Coalition. Please welcome Michelle Hannon. And finally, our last panelist has held positions from county prosecutor to lieutenant governor to Ohio senator. He is currently our Ohio Attorney General and grandfather of 19. You should see the Christmas card. Please welcome Mike DeWine. On behalf of the Columbus Metropolitan Club, the Dispatch, the YWCA, please welcome all of our panelists and Glenn McIntyre, who is our moderator today. And the microphone is all yours, Glenn. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here today. I'm proud to call Columbus home. I've worked at Channel 10 for 5 years now, and very proud to work for a company that's committed and invested in serious local journalism. That's what's brought me to this issue and made me aware of this scourge of modern-day slavery that exists in 2013 here in Central Ohio. And I've been working on a story for the past 9 months on this topic, and I've come to know some of our panelists here. I know they have a lot to share, so I'm really happy to be here to further this really important discussion. I want to start with Michelle. This is a new topic for a lot of people. Let's start with the basics. What is human trafficking, and what's different from that and what we think of as street prostitution?
Right, absolutely. Well, and I will leave the technicalities of the law to the folks sitting to either side of me probably, but from a layperson's perspective, human trafficking takes several different forms. It's essentially commercial exploitation of people in either the sex industry or in other labor settings. And what makes it unique, how I guess you differentiate that from prostitution or from just terrible labor situations, is that people are held captive. They're trapped in these situations, so they are unable to leave. And they're held there by a variety of means, including force, fraud, or coercion. Probably one unique qualifier to that, though, is that if by federal law, if a minor, if someone under the age of 18 is trafficked in the sex industry in any way, then they're by federal definition a victim of trafficking automatically, regardless of the proof of the force, fraud, or the coercion.
And General DeWine, this is something you think of third world countries when you hear of this. What is the reality of this issue in Central Ohio and in Ohio at large?
Well, I think what makes it so difficult from a law enforcement, one of the things that makes it so difficult from a law enforcement point of view is that culturally we think human trafficking occurs in Thailand or someplace else, but not here. And, Michelle's got a good definition. My definition is pretty simple, too, and that is that human trafficking is compelling someone to do something they don't want to do against their will. And so if you kind of think of it that way, and that may not be the legal definition, it's pretty all-encompassing. But the challenge is that we many times do not recognize it. If someone breaks into your house, you know your house has been broken into. You know there's a crime. If you're walking down the street in Columbus and you see someone get mugged, you know there's a crime. You saw it, it occurred, you know what to do about it. We unfortunately see human trafficking many times or evidence of it and never enters our consciousness. So it's not something that we're used to thinking about. Even the term is kind of an exotic term, and we just don't recognize it.
And what do we know about the reality of it here in Central Ohio? This is a local issue.
It is a local issue. It is occurring. Two very, very quick stories. And one of the things that we have is the Central Ohio Human Trafficking Task Force. which has a lot of local departments in it. We initially put it together in the organized crime, which is under the Attorney General's office, and we've had some results. I mean, we had one case that's been very widely reported in the media where a guy goes down into Chillicothe, and he brings some women up to Columbus, ostensibly to party, and it turns out he uses them for human trafficking by the use of drugs and ensnaring them, holding them, and ultimately it's human trafficking. That's one example. But another example is clear across the state in Warren, Ohio. I'll make a long story very, very quick because I know we have other things to talk about. But I was over there a couple years ago, and I had some local citizens who came up to me and said, "Hey, we've got 10 massage parlors in Warren. We want you to investigate it." Now, I'm kind of naive. I said, "Well, what's the problem? You got massage parlors." "Well, we don't think they're really massage parlors." So we did a long, long investigation. And I was there when we did the raid. It was abundantly clear that this was a prostitution operation that was going on. But once we got into it further, it looked more and more not only like prostitution, but in addition to that, human trafficking. When we walked in, none of the women who were working there spoke English. Most of them wouldn't make any eye contact. They wouldn't talk to you. We checked to see, most of them came out of New York State. They were shipped out of New York in there. When they wanted to go shopping, someone escorted them to go shopping, Walmarts, somewhere. I walked into a room and looked, and I saw a bunch of sleeping bags on the floor. They were sleeping there. And then, to crown that all off, we found that their passports, they didn't have them. Somebody else was holding their passports. So all the signs of human, the case is still under investigation, very difficult case to investigate, and these are tough cases. But it gives you some idea of the breadth of human trafficking. It's all kinds of different things.
Judge Herbert, you, along with Michelle, are really on the front lines of this issue. Who are these girls, these young women, and what are the situations they're coming from?
Well, it really ranges, Glenn, from normal high school kids that you think are just going to the mall to have fun, and they run into some slick talkers, and they connect on Facebook, and next thing you know, hey, you look really pretty in your photo. How about let's do some modeling? And then it can go forward from there. And then they talk about the problems in their lives, and then they introduce drugs. And so it can go down a slippery slope to a vulnerable 14-year-old girl pretty fast. In court, one thing I noticed was that, see, I'm a municipal court judge, okay? That's the lowest level judge there is on earth, okay? Somebody said, what's the difference between you and Judge Graham? I said, well, like me and God, so... So I'm down there in the trenches, but I also have the benefit of that's where all these women come. And believe it or not, you are spending $5.4 million a year to enforce your prostitution laws here in Columbus, Ohio. So I was aware of that and studied some of the background. Most of the background of the women in our court have a history of sexual and physical abuse in the home. About 72% of them come from a home where a relative, one lady in the program had 2 children from her stepfather before her mother believed that he could be the father. So there's this early on trauma that then when you add to the normal upbringing problems, it has a tendency to make that girl run away from home. She's normally then labeled as a runaway, a bad kid. She's put back in the house. She tries to run away again. She's put in foster care. At that point in time, normally the foster homes are not prepared to deal with this type of trauma. She's just labeled as this bad kid. Next thing you know, she's a permanent runaway and gets seasoned and brought into a system where she's taking pictures or on the internet. Then she's being offered up as a client. So that's pretty much how someone, then how I get involved is if they get caught while they're being human trafficked committing the offense that we have labeled as prostitution, then they get arrested and they come to my court. And I see them as a defendant in jail.
While you're on the topic, can you talk a little bit more about catch court and
Sure.
sort of the paradigm shift involved in not looking at these women as criminals, but as victims?
Well, sure, Glenn, thanks. It was quite a day in arraignment court. There was 36 hearings I was going to have on domestic violence cases, nothing to do with prostitution. And I had to determine whether or not I should issue a protection order for this woman against this man that had done certain things to her. So we had all this testimony going on. Victims were being brought up on my left, and the defendants were being brought out on my right. And if you're ever down in court, you can see the bright red marks glowing from a woman's neck, hair pulled out, puffy eyes, usually broken bones. Sometimes it's just a picture from a hospital room. She couldn't make it to court. It really sickens you, and I was starting to not be real happy down there in court, wondering how we could, as a society, live like this. And the sheriff brought the next defendant out on my right, and I looked over, and I saw a victim. I don't know how it happened. It went like that in my head, and I looked down at the folder and said prostitute. And you know, she had that same betrayed, beaten up, lost, scared, feeling about it. And so that's when I started to do the research and found out that I had seen it wrong for all these years, and that they really were a part of a clandestine, evil system that needs to be brought about. So we started a process of allowing them to exit from this lifestyle. And through Amethyst and Salvation Army and Mary Haven, we've started to develop a program to let them exit the lifestyle, and it's been extremely successful so far.
Michelle, we can talk about this issue in abstract terms, but it wasn't until I really heard the brutal realities of what this life is like that it really kind of hit me in the face. Can you be blunt and talk about what these women are put through?
Yeah, I brought a couple of stories to share that I think will help to illustrate. And Judge Herbert has mentioned, and we've talked about there's a very long history often of sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse before someone actually is recruited into trafficking, and that creates a big part of the vulnerability for them. It makes it much more easy for a child to be brought into this. A story, so that's a very common experience for a lot of the folks that we serve. To date, we have served 246 survivors of trafficking, and the vast majority have been female victims of sex trafficking. So we have a smaller percentage, about 13% of our cases are labor trafficking, and about 9% are male, who are typically in the labor trafficking settings. But so just kind of looking over the span of that, I thought that this case with Amanda would be helpful to share a little bit about what things are like for her at the time when she is seeking help. She called our Central Ohio hotline, which is operated through our coalition and is primarily staffed by volunteers in the Salvation Army. And so she called the hotline in complete distress. She'd found her way to a woman who could help her, kind of a good Samaritan out there who was willing to help her connect with services. So in the past week and a half, she'd had 13 hours of sleep. And she had in that time a little bit of junk food and a couple of bologna sandwiches, and that was her that was how her basic needs were being met in the past week and a half, where she was being sold for sex. She called the hotline in a completely traumatized state and was able to access immediate assistance and connect with the Salvation Army's 24-hour response and long-term case management, and began to kind of understand. So she had been trafficked in multiple locations and would get away from and then be found by a woman who was her trafficker. So oftentimes we will see someone manipulated into a trafficking relationship with someone who's posing as a boyfriend, and the trafficking victim honestly believes that this person genuinely cares about them and loves them and wants to make a family with them, when in fact they're just going to exploit them for money. But traffickers can take a lot of different forms. In Amanda's case, it was a woman who was able to kind of disarm her through being motherly and less threatening, and was able to kind of bring her into the fold, and then was ruthlessly selling her, and as Amanda would escape, she would then come back to her. At the time, Amanda had a 5-year-old daughter. They were, of course, estranged from each other, and we were able to help her reunite with the daughter, and to actually, for her sake, then get into a residential rehabilitation program that was so she was able to stay stable and stay reunited with her family, which was really amazing. But I think that kind of this very severe emotional, physical trauma. Traffickers often use what really looks like torture techniques to keep people enslaved. And so there's a strong relationship component where someone feels, maybe is feeling that they're being loved for the first time. Maybe they haven't had a lot of unconditional love and they don't really know what that feels like. And what they find then is they're so vulnerable to a trafficker who's presenting that kind of the way it looks on TV, and it's feeling really real to her, but in fact it's not. From that point forward, once you have that emotional hook and the trauma bonding, or the Stockholm syndrome as we would know it in other settings, it's very difficult for someone to leave, both out of fear of what will happen if they do, and fear for their own safety, fear that some of the others who are being trafficked will be harmed if they leave in punishment, and also just fear of being out alone and being cast off away from the only kind of family that maybe they've ever really understood or known.
General DeWine, I've heard people say that one of the biggest challenges in these cases are that the victims sometimes don't recognize themselves as victims because of the manipulation and the mind control. From your point of view, how difficult are these cases to prosecute?
Well, they're difficult to prosecute for a number of reasons, and I just want to say that the Attorney General's office first really became involved in this issue under my predecessor, Rich Cordray. And Rich did some very, very great work in this area. We have continued that involvement, and because of my background as a former prosecuting attorney, we've taken it another step, not another direction, but maybe the next logical step, which is to put a lot of emphasis on criminal prosecution. Although we do have a very good program with the Salvation Army, with Michelle, which is really looking at it from a holistic approach. We were able to get a Department of Justice grant that was enable us to do this, and so it's not just, I want to say, it's not just a law enforcement problem. As the judge has pointed out very well, and Michelle, it has to be a holistic approach. But what makes it difficult, I think, is what we talked about before. Witnesses don't recognize it. You know, you go into, and someone goes in and gets their nails done. How many people look around to see whether or not the person who is there speaks English? They won't look you in the eye. There's sleeping bags over in the corner. I mean, maybe we don't look around, but those are all signs that maybe human trafficking is going on there. So we don't, it's places where we don't expect to see it. We're not used to reporting it. We're not used to thinking about it as witnesses. So you got a witness problem, number one. Then, as you stated, you many times have a victim problem. For the reasons that the judge and Michelle have talked about, sometimes they don't see themselves really as the victim. I mean, when we went in to warn, I mean, these women are victims, but they either wouldn't admit they were victims or didn't see themselves as victims or were too scared to talk to us and to give us any valuable information. So it could be any number of things. These are very difficult for many, many reasons, and that's, you know, really the challenge. And we have this task force in Central Ohio. We're developing some cases, but I will tell you, these cases are long-term, slow investigations. And so as someone, you know, my staff always says, I want instant results, and I'm very impatient. I'm impatient, and so there's a frustration level that I have about our ability to get these guys, but we're getting them, and we're going to get more of them with your help.
Judge Herbert, you have some thoughts on that? It seems like we still have a long way to go before some in law enforcement and people in society make that shift, that these are victims, not criminals.
Yeah, but I think we've made tremendous strides so far. I mean, I really have to say that I think the movement with regard to this issue has been phenomenal. And so I want to thank everybody for keeping an open mind and listening today. It is tough. You know, I'm guilty of trying to be out here in the public and changing your minds, and one day I realized when a woman raised her hand, she said, Judge Herbert, how do I know if I'm a victim? And I was immediately convicted that I'd failed educating them as to what this problem is. So that was kind of an exciting point that we then went forward, and now they all receive human trafficking assessments and that takes them with the social worker through their history, and they can see it. And to see them walk out of a room now with a whole changed perspective, going in, they were thinking of themselves as this dirty, horrible woman who was absolutely worth less, and coming out and understanding that she was more part of an evil system that was designed around selfish profit. It's wonderful. So we do need more education, a lot more. And also, one critical thing I wanted to say, I don't know if I'm going to have time to talk again, but those of you out there, especially if you have daughters, talk to them, get them some education, because what goes on, when I talk to civic groups around, mothers coming up to me, you can't believe what happens on social media and how vulnerable people are. And so really hone in on that, because I know even my own 21-year-old college daughter, it started happening to her, and if I hadn't had all this years of experience and talking and seeing it, I wouldn't have recognized it and able to stop it. So I really want to implore you all to be vigilant with regard to this, because it's big, and and once it starts, the results are devastating to that individual and that family. And I've got girls in my program, one's from the lakes. It's not just girls on the west side, east side. I've got girls in the program that have been sucked into this thing from extremely nice neighborhoods. So,
I've heard this compared to dealing drugs, that a dealer can sell, a bag of marijuana or cocaine once. He can sell a girl or a woman repeatedly and continue to profit off of her. Is that an apt analogy in your mind, Michelle?
Yeah, that is exactly the situation. And depending on a person, a trafficking victim situation, they may be required to bring into the traffickers $500, $1,000 per night. So when you think about the sheer profits that the trafficker is making, the victim is seeing none of those dollars, is in no way profiting from this. In fact, she may be really happy to receive, some special rewards, like a trip to McDonald's or maybe getting her nails done. And meanwhile, if she's working 6 nights a week, you can kind of do the math, but she's bringing in $6,000 a week for someone who's profiting tax-free from those dollars. So that is absolutely the case, and we'll often see that relationship go on and perhaps continue until she gets out, if she survives, because the mortality rate is really high. But if she gets out of the situation, may be able to get assistance and start to rebuild her life. But a lot of times it's not so much of a leaving as she may just stop being valuable to the trafficker, because at some point her financial value will diminish, and there are plenty of other, sadly, victims out there that could be recruited in that could be more profitable for the trafficker, and so she may be discarded. And what we see, and now we talk about the folks, kind of the perceptions that Judge Herbert is talking about, that we, as a society, as a culture, as a community, we tend to see these women as public nuisances. They're drug addicted, they're homeless, they're a drain on our system, and this is how we tend to view them. And in fact, they are very oftentimes victims of trafficking who have been, victimized since adolescence, and we've just simply failed them long enough that now they're adults and we tend to view them as a nuisance. But thinking about the average age of entry into prostitution, and there's a lot of research and it all converges around the same time frame, whether it's national or state or local, but the average age that anybody is brought into prostitution is 12 to 14. So by the federal law, by definition, clearly, with slam dunk, they're victims of trafficking, there's no question. And it helps us, I think, to rethink prostitution and that continuum between that and human trafficking and what that looks like in someone's life.
And in discussions with vice cops, they talk about, nobody would choose this. This drives home the point that these are victims. I mean, these women are being forced to have sex with 10 to, I've heard, up to 40 men in a day.
Right.
I mean, that's the horrible reality they're facing out there.
That is exactly true. And again, where there's been some research, firsthand research, it varies, but around 90% of anyone who's in a prostitution situation, whether it's trafficking or where it fits on that spectrum, would say they'd like to leave if they could. and the vast, vast majority are under the control of a trafficker. So we have myths, I think. We believe a lot of myths about free agents who are out in our community prostituting, making money, just kind of dodging the law, not paying taxes. And it's just simply not the case in probably 90% of the situations, if not more.
General DeWine, is this unique in any way to Central Ohio? Is what we're seeing here any different than any other city our size, or is there something about this area that lends itself to this, or?
I think human trafficking really is everywhere. I think we are now doing a much better job detecting it and figuring out that it exists. So it's difficult to compare, or Michelle may have some idea, or the judge, compare statistics. But, it's Central Ohio. We have a large base of people. We have a mobile society. We're here with a bunch of interstates going through Columbus. I mean, it's all the reasons that we like the area, but we would expect to find human trafficking there. The other thing that we have found is when you have, if you have a big national event, the Arnold Classic, for example, you're going to see human trafficking. You get a national event, whether it's Super Bowl, whatever it is, it's not because the sponsors want it, but it's the people who come in, and human trafficking, I'll guarantee you, is going to exist where there's a big national event.
Let's talk about the issue of demand. I've heard from folks that not so much is being done to address that issue and to crack down on the people who are fueling this market and buying sex. Anyone on the panel have thoughts on that?
Well, we've got a great police force. Columbus Police Department is awesome. I've met with Chief Jacobs, and she is aware of this issue. And the commanders and vice and the lieutenants and the detectives. This has been kind of a fun process to go through because they viewed these women like you might and like I did. But I invited them down to court, and they came down and saw the results, and they've shifted their paradigm. But it's a slow process. That's a huge organization. And so I'm hoping within the next year, and I see Teresa Feder here, and she's Representative Feder, right?
She was
Oh, she just left, okay.
She was right
See,
there.
I looked down for half a second, she bolted out. What we need is some more incentive to go after the buyers, because it's equally illegal to sell sex as it is to buy it. And traditionally here in our town, we arrest about 1,000 women a year for selling it, and about 10 men. When the statistics really are, the buyers, I did the math because this was fun one day. If each woman's only with 3 men a week, you can fill Ohio Stadium in 1 year worth of John's crimes versus just 1,000 women. So that was just my big illustration point there. But if we could have more incentives, such as mandatory completion of John's School. John's School is an awesome thing. And Rick Pfeiffer has a great John's School here in Columbus. That's one of the best in Ohio. Another thing I've got to throw out is we've got a new entity that you may not want me to say this because it's so beneficial for your local community, but the casino that we put out on the west side has already started to attract additional crime as well as vice, drugs and prostitution issues. So we're going to need to ramp up our enforcement just based on some changes we've made and what we should have been at earlier.
What's behind that number? That number is so shockingly lopsided between the number of women who are arrested versus the number of Johns. What's behind that?
Well, it's not just that you've got to change the culture. It's more difficult to arrest men. Think about it. You've got to take a female officer and put her in plain clothes, dress her as a prostituted woman. I don't say prostitute anymore. And then you've got to have people guarding her in locations that can't be seen, hidden cars with video camera. It's a huge process. I sat in, they let me sit in on a sting. It's an awesome process, but it's extremely expensive. And right now, our budget isn't such within the police force that it lends itself to spending all that money to get the Johns. It's great to watch it go down. You know, they go up to the window and, you know, what do you want? How much is that? $10. I'm in. Next thing you know, all the cuffs are on and everything. You know, it's too good to be true, right? So we got a great police force. I love working with them. You should be proud of them. Chief Jacobs is doing awesome. And I think we're right at the tip of changing this over. But we need to help them with these budgetary issues.
Michelle?
I completely agree with all of that. And also thinking just from an education perspective, part of this gets to the demand side of this human trafficking work and looking at ways to educate our community so that we really understand the dynamics of prostitution and the harm that it causes. And oftentimes, I think people are purchasing sex without understanding, they're believing the myth and they're not understanding the reality. And if we can educate more broadly about that reality, I think that will be a deterrent. And also it just underscores the importance of the education that we do in schools so that we raise young people who respect themselves and respect each other. And this idea of someone being for sale, you know, I hope we can educate ourselves out of this problem over time. And there's some great efforts. Attorney General's, the Ohio Human Trafficking Commission, which is organized under Attorney General DeWine, has, among other things, a demand reduction committee, so a whole group that's focused on these efforts and looking at best practices and what can be done. And then, you know, at the community coalitions, we have one here. There are 10 others in our state, and we're working to encourage the development of more. Through those local coalitions, then being able to kind of keep that ball rolling and bring it to that local level and hopefully have an impact both on the enforcement side, which I wholeheartedly support, and then also the education and prevention side as well.
I want to give the audience a heads up that in about 5 minutes we'll be switching to audience questions. So if you have a question, you can step up to the mic here and we'll start that in about 5 minutes. General DeWine, can you talk about, Ohio has made progress, significant progress in the last few years on this issue. Can you talk about what the progress we've made and what else you would like to see done?
I think more forums like this and more public discussion. We've come a long way, and you know, but we can't be happy where we are. We've got to continue to move forward, and so much of it depends on the public, not just the public support for what we're doing, but the public's help and the public's participation, identifying when human trafficking is occurring. And I'll go back to my example clear on the eastern side of the state in Warren. We never would have got involved. You know how we got involved? I had a group of citizens who literally wanted a meeting with me. And so I was going to be in that part of the state. We set up a meeting in a church. They sat around the basement of this church, and they told me about something that didn't know what was going on in Warren, and said, we can't get anything done. We need to get something done. And so that was a citizens' initiative that got that done. And so it can't come from the top down. It's like anything else in law enforcement. It's got to come from the bottom up. And the other thing I think is a continuation of trying to change the culture and figure out really who are victims, and people that we many times look at culturally. We've been brought up not to look at them as victims. Think how you were brought up. You didn't look at them as victims. Most of us didn't. Okay, today we know more. We have a better understanding. And just as the judge has talked so very eloquently about his evolution and understanding, and he was right there watching that, if everyone could see what the judge saw, they would understand that we have a lot of victims here. So it's an education problem, challenge.
And Judge, you've had great success with Catch Court. You've sort of been able to show and prove the cycle can be broken. Can you talk about some of the success you've had?
All right. Well,
and for folks who aren't familiar with Catch Court.
That's a softball. I appreciate that. I never knew when we got started. I never knew with all these ladies chained up with no hope could be. When you have a special docket, you have a drug court, right? And that's for people who commit crimes that are on drugs. You solve the drug problem, and they stop committing crimes, right? Mental health court, get them some medicine and some counseling, and they stop committing the crime. But how about somebody that's not only got drugs, homelessness, mental health, but then you add the trauma on top of that, and you've got this multiple complex issue that is really difficult. But we've had 100, let's just say 100, it's probably like 122. Out of the 100 women that have been accepted into the catch court in the last 3 years, 66% of them have had no new offenses. And that's remarkable from what it was before. Now, only 20% of them have gone on to graduate. But of those, they're in college. One lady just got invited to be on the national, is it Phi Beta Kappa? Is that an honorary, something I would never be invited to? Some really smart thing. So we've got 3 women in college. They volunteer, and they go to women's prisons. I was just at the Human Trafficking Day, and 4 of them were testifying at the rotunda with regards to this issue and how to prevent it and how to be more aware of it. So I'm here to give you hope that this is a worthwhile cause. That if you've ever been to court, and I see many of you have, you know that these women are a significant community and that they support each other and that they are doing things that no one ever thought possible. When we said, I'm a municipal court judge, right? What do I deal with? No operator's license, right? Okay, all those traffic cases. I've never met a defendant. I've never been around defendants like these. We call them defendants, okay? Most defendants, whether I was a defense attorney, a prosecutor, or a judge, they hate the cops. Sorry, police officers. They hate them. They hate their public defenders, the attorneys that are paid to represent them. They hate those judges that throw that sentence down on them, make them do a bunch of things they don't want to do. Then they got to go see a probation officer, and guess what? They hate them too. And then I got to hear them come back to court with all these excuses as to why they didn't want to do what the probation officer wanted them to do to get back in just compliance with the law. All right? These women in the program, they say the cops rescue them. They're their rescuers. They meet our staff. They love them. They'll do anything the probation officer asks. They think the judge is a great guy, of course. And, and it's just amazing to see them to go on and get things like a valid driver's license. And you may laugh at that, but you don't know how many people drive without valid driver's licenses, and they don't care. These women, they don't have to get their GED, but they are. And they're getting valid driver's license. They have insurance. They're going to college. They're getting their children back. Sorry, Glenn got me started, so I'm going to cut it off because I know we're waiting on time. But I'm telling you, this is worth it. Any step that you make for these women, and also I want to say one thing for the guys. You know, as men, we're not going to have a lot of contact with these women. We're never going to be allowed to be in much contact with them because of what they've been through. But I'll tell you what, it came to me, and this is why I'm out as often as I can. If you're a man and you want to be a part of protecting women and girls right here in Columbus, Ohio, let's start a campaign. What Michelle was talking about is called End Demand Campaign. Let's start that. That's one thing men can do. And so I've started on that process with the Salvation Army and a lot of others. And I'd like to see that happen in 2013. Thank you.
And we have time for questions from the audience. Microphone's right here. Don't be shy. I know there's something I've missed. Just come up to the microphone. Please state your name and please try to avoid any long editorial comments.
Yes. My name's Rebecca Asmo, and I'm with the Boys and Girls Clubs of Columbus. One thing that I've personally seen at least a dozen times over the past 2 years has been we serve a lot of young girls who are in the foster care system, and they may be stable at one point, attending a program like ours, possibly another program, and something happens in their life where they have to be moved to another living situation. We have no authority to, compel their guardians or whoever it is to keep them connected to a program where they are having some supportive relationships. And I've seen now many times these girls really disappear. And, I worry that a lot of them may have been trafficked. And I'm just wondering what is being done, or what do you think can be done to really compel these girls and also our young men to really be connected to these organizations and to the relationships that could help prevent them from going into a trafficking situation? Thank you.
It's a great question, and it's probably the heart of what is difficult around this work, is that I think some of our greatest challenges lie with how we support and address the issue of minors who are trafficked, and as we know, a lot of minors are trafficked. There is some work going on both at the state level and at local levels to look at how we bring all the youth serving systems together and find ways to make this work better. And under the U.S. Attorney's Office's leadership and some of the law enforcement partners that we've been working with, we've been meeting with child welfare and with other key stakeholders, Department of Youth Services, and looking at how can all of these systems talk so that if a child, if a youth is identified as at risk, that all of the systems that child might possibly encounter will all have a way of wrapping around and knowing that. And instead of, so that because we are probably going to lose a child from one situation, they may end one relationship, but if they come into a shelter, if they're identified as a missing child through the AG's office, that whole system will work together on that. So we are not there yet, but those discussions are ongoing, and I think we would welcome anyone's input and involvement in that. It's definitely something that we need to address.
My name is Deb Barker, and I'm with Kali Intelligence. I have a question for Michelle. The, excuse me, the young women that are saved by you, are you ever able to get information about their captors from them? Are you ever able to get leads that lead to an arrest?
Yes, what we do is, of course, we respect the individual's choice in terms of if they're an adult, whether they would like to talk with law enforcement. What we do is we first of all, first they need to kind of just be in a safe situation and have a chance to have their basic needs met. But when we start to talk with them about next steps, one of the first things we do is talk about how much we really love and trust our law enforcement partners, and that we have found them to be very trustworthy. We know that how they're going to respond, and they're good folks, and you can talk with them. And so we make that known, and we let the survivor know that it's their choice about what they would like to do going forward. And that can range anything from kind of anonymous tip information to then setting up a meeting where the investigators with our task force will then come and meet with them one-on-one, or with our advocate present. So we do everything possible to encourage that way, because of course we have law enforcement identified cases, and that is kind of the goal, but we also have many, many cases that come through our local hotline, come through the national hotline, and maybe get forwarded to us. And that hotline is listed in this that you have at your table today. But a lot come this way first, and it's our job to help bridge with law enforcement so that we are not just helping that person restore their life, but we're getting to the root of the problem and getting those traffickers behind bars.
Hi, Julie Graber. The Congress has, as of yet, to reauthorize the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. I'm curious as to how that might impact services and resources that are available to us to address this problem for as long as it is delayed.
General, anyone?
I have no idea.
I think
Oh, no.
at the moment, I think there will still be funding provided, even though the reauthorization hasn't happened, because it's quite late on the schedule with that now. But in terms of making progress in strengthening the law, in strengthening capacity for victim services, some of those things will wait for the reauthorization. So it is definitely it's a definite legislative priority for the advocates at the state level, and then also across those 11 coalitions across the state.
Hi, my name is Kathy Curran. I'm the Executive Director of CASA of Franklin County. CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates. And we train guardians that become guardian ad litems for the kids of these victims. And most of the children that our guardians work with do have, they're victims of violence. They've been in prostitution, they have mental health issues, they have substance abuse issues. And the facts support that the guardians that work with these kids are less likely to fall into the same pattern as their mom, or in some cases their dad. I guess what I'd like to do is just compliment you on what you're doing, and also encourage, and I know I've talked with most of you about this issue, but just the continual collaboration and support of each other, being aware of what we all do, so we can continue to work more closely together. Judge Herbert, I'm excited to have you come and talk with our guardians. I know you have in the past, but to help our folks know what to look for, know how to deal with these kids that are seeing and hearing these things from their parents. So I guess I'm just kind of drawing that circle once again. The more help these women get, the less help we're going to have to give to their kids.
Right.
And it's just one vicious circle. So thank you for what you're doing.
Good job.
Hi, my name is Liz Hickson, and today I'm representing Trinity United Methodist Church up in Grandview, and our church is starting a program that is going to help an institution called Grace Haven that is going to help these girls find shelter, and we're just in the beginning stages and making people aware in the congregation of it, and just wondered, I'm sure you welcome that, and if you have any comments about it.
Well, I think that's fabulous, and it kind of speaking from a coalition model, a coalition perspective, that's the beauty of having a really broad community coalition in our community and a place for people to come and to work together, because there has to be a whole continuum of care for services depending on the type of trafficking and the characteristics of the victim. And it takes a whole community to provide that. And we have some fantastic partners. Grace Haven is certainly one of them, that are working together to make this seamless so that when people are identified, they get what they need, and it just happens without feeling like we're climbing a mountain every single time. So I think that's fantastic. And from just a shout out for the coalition, the information about it and website is also located on this handout that you have. And anyone is welcome to come and be part of that process, to join. We have about 90 organizations, I think it's actually about 100 organizations now who are members of the coalition, and several hundred individuals. So you don't have to represent an organization to be actively involved. In fact, some of our most active members are not with an organization. But all are welcome to come to the table and help us to identify the needs and find ways to address them.
Anyone else?
Hello, I'm Andrea Volps-Jenny, and I have a suggestion and also question if it would be possible that, like Frontline does, and 48 Hours, to actually have a filmed bust, so that so that people really can see. You'd reach a wider audience, and then it'd be, yeah. I know it'd be expensive, but we have Channel 10. So, anyway, just bring more knowledge to it.
I mean, I can speak to that briefly. Like I said, I've been working on a story for 9 months we don't have an air date yet because I'm still working on it, but we're doing these hour-long local specials. They're sort of like a local version of 60 Minutes, where we get to look in depth and long form at an issue that you can't normally do on a local newscast. So that'll be coming up. So
Great.
Stay tuned for that.
Great.
Yeah. Plug. Hi.
My name is Doug Wyatt. I want to thank you all for being on the panel. And we heard from Attorney General DeWine about the difficulty in spotting trafficking. And Judge Herbert, you see the victims after they've had an encounter with law enforcement. Michelle, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what the Army, the Salvation Army, and the Coalition is doing to reach out to victims maybe prior to them arriving at court. And then a follow-on question, I think this might have been answered. I was going from this room to this room with regard to Grace Haven, but how well do you think the Health and Human Services community in Columbus is equipped to handle the problem, given the trauma that these victims have been through and all the tremendous needs they have?
Right. Well, there are several, front doors into the system for us. And certainly the CATCH program kind of catches folks right after one of those front doors, which is incarceration, because a number of women will be arrested for solicitation. So that's a really important front door into the system. For others who may call the hotline, who may be identified by a Good Samaritan or someone who's been to a training and suddenly know what they're looking for, this emergency response is kind of the second place. So our role, the Salvation Army's role, is to operate that hotline, to provide the 24-hour emergency response. So our staff will respond anytime, 24/7, to someone who is in need of assistance. Obviously, that's closely partnered with law enforcement. So kind of in our role in the task force in terms of being as the victim services provider for the law enforcement task force is to also then be on call if they have a bust, and our staff are able to meet immediately, get right on site, and to start assisting the victims on site in those in that location. Kind of depending on how someone comes in, what happens from there is this comprehensive case management model, which means that the staff person partners with the survivor and helps them access everything that they need. So kind of whatever that is, and so utilizing existing services in the community, helping to find some that are trafficking specific, where those are really needed. And to your question about the gaps, I think we all feel the need for residential treatment for particularly for women who have been trafficked, and also for minors in the sex industry. So across the whole spectrum, we do really well with a number of those folks outside of residential treatment, and we do really well with labor trafficking outside of that typically. But for a certain percentage who've endured this horrendous trauma, alcohol and drug and trauma treatment on site is something that's really necessary, that is a real gap for us. Others would just speak to awareness and training would be other big gaps in the community.
Thank you. Thank you all. I think, you know, to have so many of you bringing such important attention and bright light to this real tragedy is terrific, and you're all to be commended, as well as all those in the audience who are doing it. I know Columbus Area Leadership Program had a project last year under direction of Lori Marsh. It's just, you know, it's time, and it's great. So thank you. I think the Salvation Army has this as an international project, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, there's a real international effort and a long history with it, which is heartening and also discouraging because it's still here and we're still working on it 150 years later.
Exactly. Well, let's keep working. I hope you enjoyed today's forum. You can see it again if you like.